I'm out here in Livermore, California today at Cornerstone Fellowship Church with a number of members of their staff, and we appreciate them having us. I'm also here with many of the folks from Menlo Park Presbyterian Church, and I'm going to be doing a short talk on meetings. Now, when I talk to most leaders, they said, you know, if I don't have to go to meetings anymore, or if I don't have to manage people, I really like my job more. Which really doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? That's like a surgeon saying, if I didn't have to operate on people, I'd like my job more. Or a football player saying, if it weren't for the games and the practices, I would like my job a lot more. The truth of the matter is, for most of us who work in the business world or even in churches, if we're not preaching or leading music, we're going to meetings and getting stuff done. So if we say that we don't like our meetings, we're kind of admitting that we don't like our jobs. And that's a problem. And unfortunately, in society, we've come to the position where we've actually accepted this and just said meetings are bad, they're just corporate penance, they're just something we have to do to get through the day. The fact of the matter is meetings are not inherently bad. There's nothing wrong with meetings. But most meetings really stink. They just don't need to. And there's some things we can do. Now there's two reasons why most of our meetings are bad. There's two reasons, and both of them are fixable. The first one is what meetings lack is something that a bad movie lacks. You see, too many meetings are boring. How many people here go to meetings that are boring? Yeah, we've all been to those meetings. You know what makes a movie great? I was a screenwriter in a previous life, and the thing about every movie, whether it's a lighthearted romantic comedy, or whether it's an action movie, or a real thoughtful, thought-provoking movie, every movie at its core has to have one thing, and that is conflict. Every meeting has conflict. There's something worth caring about. There's some tension. There's something at stake that people give a darn about. And if you don't have that, you're bored. Can anybody here guess what the most important part of a movie is? If a movie is 2 hours in length or 120 pages on paper, because it's a page a minute, what are the most important pages or part of that movie? Anybody guess? What's that?
The resolution.
The resolution. Very good. Wrong, but very good guess. I used to think that too. Anybody else have an answer?
The climax.
The climax. Another great wrong answer, but that's very good. Actually, the most important part of a movie or a script is the first 10 minutes or the first 10 pages, because that's when we decide whether we like a movie or not. If the first 10 minutes of a movie are bad, we tend to go, this is boring, and then it picks up later, we go, I like this part, it's too bad this is a boring movie. It's kind of like a first impression of a person, right? And if you're trying to get your screenplay read in Hollywood, you better make the first 10 pages jump off the page, because otherwise they're probably not going to get through the rest of it. And this is just so important. It's called the hook in a movie. And think about your very favorite movies. Most of them really grabbed your attention at the beginning. Not only did they grab your attention, but they gave you a reason to care. You thought, oh, something is about to happen that's going to play out in the rest of this movie that I need to care about. And that's what makes a movie great. The same thing should be true about our meetings. If we can't give people a reason to care about a meeting in the first 10 minutes, we're actually asking them to do what most people do during meetings, which is plan their day or their dinner that night, or imagine what the people sitting around the table look like in their underwear. I mean, we've all done that before because we get bored. The truth of the matter is we have to grab people at the beginning of a meeting, give them a reason to care. We have to raise their level of anxiety, because that's what conflict is about, it's tension. In other words, if we have a bad meeting, if we don't do a good job resolving this issue today, then what bad could happen to our organization? All right? Now, a great way to look at this is to look at what could be potentially the most boring meeting imaginable. How are we going to turn a really stinky movie into a good one? What would be the most boring meeting you can imagine? How about a budget review? Imagine it's afternoon, you're drifting into protein coma, your boss calls you into a meeting with the rest of the team to talk about reviewing next year's budget. Okay, that sounds horrible. We've all been there. So how do we usually start these movies? We start by saying, Clay, could you please read the last year's numbers and compare them? Look, you're yawning right now. It's just boring to even think about it. I mean, it's boring to even think about it. And so somebody says, okay, last year's numbers, and people are just sitting there going, oh my gosh, the clock is moving backward, it's crazy. And we as leaders have to do a better job of being the directors of this film, of this meeting. And how do we push the conflict to the beginning? You know what we have to do? Picture this. Picture me saying, okay, you guys, I realize this sounds like a pretty boring meeting. And I know we've all got work to do, and I realize this doesn't sound too interesting, but here's what I want you to realize. The decisions we make in the next 2 hours at this meeting are going to impact everything we do for the rest of the year. We're going to have to live with these answers for 12 months. And guess what? The people that work for us, our credibility is completely on the line here. Because if we make bad decisions, they have no reason to respect us. Because we didn't honor the resources that we're giving to them to do their jobs. And finally, get this. Our competitors hope that we do a bad job during these next 2 hours because it's only going to make their job better. So to make our competitors mad, to earn the respect of our employees, and to ensure that we're not having to redo this for the next 12 months, let's sit on the edge of our seats, pay attention, and make sure that we're making the best decisions possible because this really matters. Okay, that's not an Academy Award movie, but it's certainly a lot better than Clay. Turn to the first pages of our book and read it out loud. Okay, we have to realize that people need and want tension, anxiety, and conflict, and a mechanism for resolving it. And that's why we keep watching a movie, because we want to know how it's going to be resolved. So we have to realize that conflict needs to be there. Now, if we're having a meeting and we can find no reason to have conflict, we're sitting there thinking, I don't see any anxiety potential here. I don't see any reason why we should be tense about this. Then that's probably a good opportunity to cancel that meeting and be a hero and say, I'll email you all the data. But the truth is, most of the meetings we have great potential for caring, for something being at stake. So that's something we have to do. Now, that's one of the reasons why meetings aren't good, is because we've allowed them to be boring. In fact, we like that when they're boring. People say nobody got upset, and the meeting was, it ended on time, so it was good. Imagine if people said, well, the movie ended on time, nobody seemed to be engaged, and it was a great movie. Okay, we owe it to ourselves to make it interesting. But there's another reason why meetings really do tend to be bad, and it's an unnecessary reason. And that is, in addition to lacking conflict, they lack context. They lack context. We're not sure why we're there. We go to a meeting and we find that we're doing everything at once. I call it meeting stew. We've thrown every potential ingredient off the shelves, thrown it into one big pot, stirred it together, and wondered why it tastes so bad. You see, we have to realize that not every ingredient, not every kind of conversation belongs at the same meeting. Okay, what does meeting stew look like? Well, in my home, meeting stew looks like this. It usually takes place in the bathroom when my wife and I are getting ready for work. We're brushing our teeth. She's getting ready to take the kids to school. And here's what meeting stew looks like in my house. We're saying, okay, honey, who's picking the kids up from school? Yeah, what should we have for dinner tonight? Where do you think we should go on vacation? Do you think Connor has a discipline problem? Yeah, do you think we should have another baby? Oh, you got to run. See you later. See, we've thrown every conversation into one discussion. And then I get home the next night and she says, I'm pregnant. And I'm like, I thought we were having chicken. We didn't decide that, did we? See, you can't possibly talk about big things and little things and long-term, short-term tactics, strategy in one conversation. We do it at home. It doesn't work very well. We do it at work, and it doesn't work very well. We do it in our churches, and it doesn't work very well. And we leave the meeting feeling like, oh my gosh, did we really get anything done? We jumped around from topic to topic, and nothing really got the attention it deserved, and not in the right way. You see, we need to stop combining all these things and separating them out into separate meetings. And yes, that means we're going to have more meetings, not less. More meetings, not less. Now, let me say two things. First of all, the meetings are going to be a little shorter probably, which is a good thing. But more importantly, we are going to stop complaining about having to go to so many meetings because the meetings we do go to are going to be productive and interesting and compelling, and they're going to get to resolution. And honestly, my clients, if there's one thing we work with them on that they come back almost right away and say they've changed, it's their meetings. And they say, we actually look forward to going to meetings now because we're getting things done, because we're very clear around the context of what we're talking about. So there's 4 different kinds of meetings we need to think about because they all require different contexts. And the first one, which is the least important of the 4, but it's still important, is what we call the daily check-in. The daily check-in is just a 5-minute, maybe 10, administrative meeting where nobody sits down, there's no agenda ahead of time, we'll talk more about that later, where people just get into the room together and say, hey, where's Fred? What are you doing today? Hey, is anybody going to the budget meeting? Oh, you are? Can you tell them the answer is 4,000 for my department? That's great. I don't have to go. We just check in with one another for 5 minutes a day. How about that game last night? Can you believe they voted that lady off American Idol? Whatever it is, 5, 10 minutes, and you leave. There's something about people getting together on a regular basis every day, knowing that they're going to get a chance to talk, which allows them to do a couple things. One, they save up their kind of administrivia, and they share it there, rather than sending off 5 emails during the day or leaving 4 different voicemails, which just sets off a chain reaction of waste. I'm going to see them tomorrow. I'll ask them tomorrow morning. There's something really nice about the rhythm of doing that. Vern Harnish, a friend of mine who wrote a book about this, talks about the rhythm of the huddle, he calls it. This is a little different, but it's something about the rhythm of knowing you're going to see people you work with every day for a short period of time. Okay, so that's one kind of meeting. Now, many executive teams will say, oh, Pat, we're way too busy to have a 5-minute meeting every day. And they're serious. They'll argue about that. And they'll argue with me for 2 hours, and I'll say, you know, you've just done 24 days of meetings that you've spent arguing with me for 2 hours. The truth of the matter is, when we start having these kinds of meetings, you get used to it over a period of time. 21 days, is that how long it takes to develop a habit, good or bad? And you get hooked on it in the sense that you really start to depend on, I'm going to see my teammates every day. We're going to have a chance to clear the decks, if you will. It's a wonderful thing, not unlike a family saying we're going to get together and have dinner at night. I know I'm going to see mom and dad. We can talk about it then. All right? The daily check-in. Now, this is the least important of the 4. It can be wonderful. But the next one is really critical, and that's the staff meeting, the dreaded staff meeting. This is the big problem because the staff meeting is meeting stew. And once a week, maybe every 2 weeks, whatever it is, we get together for a long, confusing, and kind of frustrating meeting. And everybody is usually mad, including the leader, but they're like, oh, well, this is part of doing business. Again, it's like penance. Here's the key to making those staff meetings work. First of all, do not put together an agenda ahead of time. I realize that sounds like I'm violating Robert's Rules of Order or committing heresy in the meeting world, but let's stop trying to guess at what the agenda should be like before the meeting, because the fact is we don't know what we should talk about during our weekly staff meetings until we get in the same room and figure out what's going on. See, anything else is at best a guess. Or even worse, it's somebody gets something on the agenda because they've lobbied the CEO or the pastor to have something on there. And everybody's sitting there watching the head of HR, God bless her or him, going over how we picked a 401k vendor. And everybody's saying, why aren't we spending our valuable time going? Because she lobbied the head of HR, the CEO, and they need time on the agenda to feel good. And we're wondering, we're wasting our time. See, what we have to do instead is we have to get together as a team. And first we have to go around the team. Let's say these are my team members. And we just have to say, give me a 30-second description of what you think you're going to be working on this week. 30 seconds. She'll probably, we could say the Lord's Prayer in 15 if we're going fast. I know I can. So you say, I'm working on this and this and this. And you say this, and the whole team goes around, and 3.5 minutes later, everybody knows what everybody else thinks they're going to be doing that week. I say thinks they're going to be doing because we need to really think about whether that's the right thing. Then as the leader, I take people through an overview of what our number one goal is. If you've read any of my other books, you know there's a thing called the rallying cry. And what are the major objectives underneath that? But whatever the simple handful of things we're working on, and we evaluate how are we doing on those things? How are our services this weekend? How's our financial giving? How's outreach? How did we think Tim did on his singing this week? And we go through however we evaluate what's going on in our church or our business, and we take 5 minutes. And I like to assign colors to each area. Green for good, yellow for okay, red for bad, orange or lime for those of you who can't make up your mind in between. And then after we make our decisions, we're now 7 minutes into our meeting. And we say, well, 2 of the major areas that we're working on are red. They're really in trouble. And nobody here seems to be working on those this week. Let's talk about what we should be doing this week to really rally around those. And let's spend some time brainstorming around those 2 issues about what we should be doing. And guess what? Just because you're in charge of accounting, if the major issue is parking, or the major issue is children's ministry, I still want to know what the financial person thinks, because you know something? That financial person is often the person with a different perspective that we need to hear. But if we go to our meetings and we have an agenda, and I go around and I say, you get 5 minutes to talk about children's ministry, you get 5 minutes to talk about outreach, you get 5 minutes to talk about finance, everybody sleeps during the part when they're not talking, we're peanut buttering our time over things that we don't even know are important. We have to make our meetings interesting by focusing on the things that are most broken or most in need of discussion, and everyone on the team has to rally around that. Let me tell you, that is fun and interesting. Because now and if somebody says, I want to talk about the 401k program, and you go, but that's not important, and everybody else says, yeah, we're not going to talk about that. What a wonderful thing to have the context to kindly say no to a conversation that doesn't need to be had. That's a beautiful thing to have. So that staff meeting can be really powerful. Now, the problem is somebody is going to say, it's usually you, Clay, somebody's going to say, well, but did you see that article in the paper about what that church is doing over in Illinois, or that church down the street is doing? We should talk about that because that could change everything. And as interesting as that sounds, and as important as that is to talk about, we can't go there. We can't have that conversation during our tactical staff meeting. We have to have the wisdom and the discipline to say, that's a big conversation that needs to be had with a little bit more knowledge and research and with more time. So I'll tell you what, everybody, let's look at your calendars. Thursday night, let's get some pizza and let's come into the office for 2 hours and let's have you guys do some research about what that church is doing down there and how it'll affect us and what we can learn from them and how we have to work with them to figure this out so that we can have a strategic meeting. See, this is the third kind of meeting, a topical strategic meeting. A big topic that requires us to get into a room, roll up our sleeves, and wrestle this topic to the ground and make some decisions. We cannot do that in a 15-minute increment in between the staff meeting topics. When we do that, we leave the meeting and we think, why did we just waste that great topic that we're all so passionate about by having only a 15-minute conversation with not enough background information and not enough time? And ladies and gentlemen, solving the problem with our services or solving the problem with outreach or with children's ministry, that's the kind of thing we all, we went into this business, if you will, to do those kinds of things. When we don't spend enough time doing it, when we don't get the opportunity to really roll up our sleeves and talk about it as a team, we are killing one of the most interesting, passionate things that we can do. People do it in the world of business all the time. There's some big strategic issue or a big competitor looming out there, and they talk about it for 10 minutes in between the expense reports and scheduling the holiday party. And it's like, what? That's got to be more important than that. Okay, so we have 3 meetings so far, right? We've got the daily check-in, 5 minutes standing up. We've got the weekly tactical, which is just let's go through our plan and make sure and let's have the agenda based on how we're doing. Then there's the ad hoc strategic meeting, which a big topic comes up that we have to rally around. The fourth one is the only one that I find to be prescriptive in terms of time. And that is we have to have this next one once a quarter. It's the quarterly off-site review meeting. Now, this isn't a touchy-feely thing. This isn't about going off and golfing or drinking or doing some other activity. This is about getting out of your office, across the street in a conference room is fine, and breathing and saying, okay, how are we doing? The race car drivers talk about the need to slow down in order to go fast. If you don't brake going into the turn, you can't accelerate coming out of it. Most of us are adrenaline addicted, though, busy executives, and we don't like to slow down at all. We like to keep our engines revved, and if you're like me, you go to Malibu Grand Prix and you floor it all the way around and you're spinning out and you're in last place and you're like, why are these little girls beating me? It's like, because they know you have to brake sometimes. And we don't like to brake at work. We're too busy. It's too busy. And the truth of the matter is, if we don't slow down, we can't go fast. And I think God created 4 seasons for a reason. And at work, we have to stop 4 times a year. Every 3 months, we have to stop and say, let's leave for a half a day or a day and look at how we're doing. How is our team doing? Is our goal still the right goal? How is our congregation doing? How are our best employees? How are our worst employees doing? What do we need to do? A great time to reflect, to pray, to have retreat as well. Okay? Then we come back to work that much clearer, that much more energized and gathered up, and able to go faster. So there's 4 meetings that we should be having. Instead of that monolithic, nasty meeting stew staff meeting, how about once a day for 5 minutes? How about once a week for about an hour? How about probably a few times a month on the big strategic ones for a couple hours? And how about once a quarter for a day or so? Now add it up. If you make it as liberal as possible and put all of the time into these meetings, have the longest ones possible, and you add it all up, you're going to be spending about 15% of your time in meetings. Now, first of all, That's not a bad thing because they're going to be good meetings. But even if you were still operating under the same assumption that meetings are bad, 15% is not that much of your time. I mean, what in the world are we doing other than that? Well, some of us say, well, I have to prepare my sermon, or I have to, research books for the children's ministry. I have to go visit Nicaragua to see if we should be doing an outreach program. That's true. But that leaves us 85% of our time. Even if we are involved in 2 teams that are fully loaded, we're now at 30%. 70% of our time is available for doing our work. You know, the truth of the matter is people actually don't hate meetings. They hate bad meetings. When we make them good, we get work done. At the end of the meeting, we're so glad that we were there, and we leave more energized, more clear, and more ready to do the important work that we're meant to do. When we can add conflict and context to our meetings, they're going to transform. And meetings are how we know if an organization is thriving, I think. If someone were to say to me, Pat, you have one opportunity to view a company, to decide whether you think it's a good company or not, I wouldn't look at their bottom line statements, their financial statements. I wouldn't look at their product sheets. I wouldn't talk to I would first watch their leadership team in a meeting, because the way they interact says a lot about all that other stuff.